Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Spark series by Opto Research Consultancy Services, which is a podcast focused on getting insights and experiences from the experts in field of eye and vision care. Today, we have Dr. Prem Nandini Sadgunam, who is a scientist from LV Prasad Eye Institute, who has an interest in pediatric vision and binocular vision. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Prem Nandini. So,
Thank you, Gopinath.
Let me start with the first question. So, what has really inspired your research career, and what are the rewarding aspects so far you have experienced from your research?
Okay, so I'm an optometrist basically from training. And so obviously teaching students and seeing patients in the clinic was what kept me stimulated. So after finishing bachelor's at Elite School of Optometry, I was working there as a clinical faculty and also seeing patients at the Rural Eye Hospital. It was during one of those patient sort of examination that I came across a little boy. He was studying in sixth standard actually, and the kid had nystagmus. And this was even before the era of Google existed. In fact, Yahoo was just becoming a search engine at that time. So the father was, I think he was into computer science at that point in time. So he would do some research and then say that you could do acupressure and fix his child's nystagmus. So he would go up, read on some therapy. And so he and me together as a team were trying to do the best for the child to see if his vision can be improved. I think at that point in time, I realized that you need to do research in order to understand more and to help your patients better. We can't really rely on what is existing that is good. I think that is what sort of pushed me into getting into research in order to solve the patient problems. And in terms of the reward, I would say that, like what you said, I'm interested in binocular vision. And so, of late, one of our research work has been in spasm of near reflex. And as we did research, and because I see patients in binocular vision clinic, now I have a better protocol on how I manage this condition, which was considered rare. And the only known treatment modality has always been giving atropine eye drops. So I think it's very rewarding when our research has a very direct translational benefit to patient care. So I would just point out that one thing as an example of a rewarding experience.
So, in continuation with that, can you share a research project which was or which is still a challenging one, and what are the skill sets which you feel which you have acquired to overcome those obstacles so far?
See, I think you need to do research only when it is challenging. My PhD advisor, Dr. Nick Fogg, would say that if you already know the result for what you're doing, then you're not doing research. You're only adding a data point to an existing curve. So I think any research project, the reason why we are doing research is because we don't know. And that's why we are doing it. And that by itself is a challenge. Asking the right questions, meaningful questions, not doing it because others are doing it or you will get funded or you want a paper out of it. Okay, if we have to do meaningful research, I think we need to ask the right questions. And increasingly, the challenge is to sustain that. Once you know what you're asking is the right question, then I think you figure it out. And that's the whole process of research. So I think figuring it out, how do you do it correctly, the literature that you sort of like read and acquire, all that is sort of the natural process of doing the research. The increasing obstacle, I suppose, is having the flexibility to ask the right question and do the right research instead of being boxed into, okay, I have to do this because there is funding there, or I have to do this because somebody else wants to do it, and you're not very sure as to why you have to do it. So those are places where you need to know when to say yes and no. Okay, that might be a challenge, but I think otherwise, if you know what you're doing with good clarity, then nothing is an obstacle.
Okay, so that's a very nice like aspect of seeing the challenges. So I know you have been doing multiple collaborative research in terms of risk and technological collaborating with engineering team. So how do you really approach collaboration with researchers and build a successful partnership?
So I think part of that comes from my postdoctoral training, because my professor Eli Pelli, he was an engineer and then he became an optometrist. And so he brings a nice balance of both engineering and optometry into the domain. So during my postdoctoral work with Professor Pelli at Skapens Eye Research Institute, in Harvard. We always had the exposure to work with engineers, and you could sort of look at the same problem from different perspectives. So I've always, I suppose, realized that that's very helpful, because you can do a lot more bringing in different multidisciplinary aspects to the same project. Again, if you're asking a question and if it is the right question, and if that approach for solving that question requires that you bring in a multidisciplinary team, then you collaborate. So don't collaborate because you have to collaborate and because there is, we have to do a multicentric study and therefore let's do it. That shouldn't be the attitude. It should be like, okay, this project deserves the expertise of different people. And then the important challenge with multidisciplinary collaboration is every stakeholder should have the same enthusiasm and passion. Otherwise, if it is just your passion, you might be working on it, but the other person will not have an equal sort of an interest in doing it. Not only with engineers, we also collaborate with neurologists outside our institute. And the reason why we are collaborating is because, as I said, coming from a healthcare profession, we are having patient care as the center focus, right? So when somebody wants to do the best for their patients, then those collaborations will fall in place and everybody will be interested. And then we work together to fix the problems. So if your interests are aligned, then it's easy to collaborate and work.
So with that, I understand you have been very ethical in all your research aspects. So how do you see or address ethical considerations in your research specifically?
I think every researcher should be ethical. It shouldn't just be one person. So that's the first thing we need to know. And given that we are in a healthcare profession, the ethics becomes even more important, because it's so very easy to tell a patient that, oh, let's do one more test for you, without them knowing that they are actually participating in a research study, right? So, and therefore it becomes even more important, and we need to be even more responsible that we make it very clear to the patient on what is required for their actual clinical care and what is required as a part of the research, and are they willing to be a part of the research, and then we take the written informed consent. So I think people in healthcare have this bigger responsibility of making sure that the patients are informed. And I'll give you an example. Before COVID came, and we were working on this project where we were testing visual fields in babies with this device called pediatric perimeter, and that's an experimental device. It's not a natural part of the healthcare system at all. So we were working in a baby hospital, and these babies were coming for their vaccine shots. And so we would clearly tell the parents that, we have come from LV Prasad Eye Institute. We are doing this test. Do you want to participate? Almost 90% of parents agreed when we explained to them, and they got very interested to see how their babies were responding to the light stimuli. And then COVID came, and post-COVID, when we approached parents, majority of them refused participation, and rightly so, because they were worried that they don't want to extend the times for their stay in the hospital. So now when we write the paper, we write that, almost 45% to 50% rejected or refused participation only because of COVID. So, and it makes sense. Nobody is going to say like, oh, why was this much of a rejection or a refusal rate? Because there is a logical reason to it. So we are not faking anything. And the fact that we got that high refusal rate also shows that we were very clear in explaining that this was an experimental project. That's not a failure. I see that as a success of the fact that we were taking a proper informed consent. And the parents knew in what they were participating. So I think as healthcare, it's very important that we take up that responsibility and very clearly explain to our patients. There is no compromise in that.
So, okay, thank you. So moving on to the next question, like how do you really stay updated on your research trends in your field, and what resources you really rely on? Maybe be it
So we have
a new research project, or how do you really stay updated?
I think we have a very vibrant lab. I'm not saying my lab alone. We have a group of members, a team of scientists at our institute that forms the Brian Holden Institute of Optometry and Vision Science. So the culture of, talking with the colleagues, interacting with them, and they tell us what's new in their field, and we sort of come across a paper. And of course, we have our students. Every week we have a critical thinkers journal club. So people bring in papers, we all sit together, discuss, even if it is not in your area of interest. I think having that sort of a very nurturing, vibrant research culture is so important. So you're not a solo person in the universe of scientists, right? So when you talk with other scientists, it sort of keeps you updated on what's going on. So you get to naturally read papers, because as a part of our lab culture, we do that. So we have our own lab journal clubs, of course, conferences, meetings. You need to be wise and pick and choose where you want to participate, because these days the options are plenty, too many online classes and all of that. But I think, yeah, in fact, to stay updated these days is much, much more easier than a pre-Google era that I actually grew up in. So I don't think there is a challenge in staying updated. It's only a question of how much can you consume. That is the challenge, because there is information overload.
Okay, so moving to the next question, what is a future trend in your research field, and what are the emerging technologies you see in terms of pediatric vision assessment or binocular vision?
So I recently attended this American Academy of Optometry conference that just got over a couple of weeks back. I suppose you get to realize where the future trend and how are the rest of the researchers and clinicians steering it, right? Obviously, I feel like there is a renewed interest in baby vision. People want to really understand a lot more about how to test babies and sort of challenging the existing paradigms. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. Even certain fundamental assumptions we make, probably we need to sit and rethink. So I think the future is to just make sure that whatever we know already is very robust and can stand the test of time. So plus, of course, with AI, ML, all of that coming into the game, there will be a lot of technology, but we'll have to see which is going to stand the test of time again, because not everything these days, everything comes fast and then dies fast as well. Okay, so what has really stood robust are the old research doing the classical psychophysical experiments, because there was so much thoroughness in how they did it. So just because something is new, it's the new technology, doesn't necessarily mean that it'll answer all our questions. It has to be put through rigorous research. So I think the focus should be on using these technologies more appropriately with rigor.
So I have last couple of questions. What advice do you have for the early research career researchers, and what they really should know before they start with?
When you asked me what sparked my research interest, right, and I gave you an example of a patient story. Nowadays, when I interview people or when I ask somebody, why do you want to do research? I don't see anyone come and tell me story in the way I said. I'm not saying that that's the right way to approach, but I hear answers like, I want to get a PhD, or, I want to study. Now you can study even without getting a PhD. Nobody is stopping you from studying. So I don't I think the first thing people need to know is they need to fully understand why is it that they want to do a PhD. Okay. I've heard of people say that I want to do a PhD because I can get doctor in front of my name. And that's like one of the sloppiest, lamest reason why one would want to do PhD. Or to say that I want to just upgrade my knowledge. So I think these are all, that shouldn't be your driving force as to why you want to do PhD. And increasingly nowadays, colleges requires that teachers who are teaching undergrad or masters, they should have a PhD. So it should not be like, oh, I have to teach, I have to be in academia, and therefore I am doing PhD. Okay, so these are all the wrong reasons for why somebody has to go do have a career in research. I think, if at all anything, PhD makes you focus on one thing so deeply down. You may become a scholar in that. You might absolutely know everything so well in that particular field, but then you do PhD and then you're teaching 10 other subjects in your college. And are you really doing justice there? Will you be a good teacher? Maybe there might be somebody else who does a better teaching than you, right? So I think the first thing people should question themselves is, why is it that I want to do PhD? Okay. Now, you might want to do because you probably have a problem in your mind already. Okay, and you're trying to find a solution. Now, I started out by saying that, this child with nystagmus, sort of like, I realized I had to learn more. Now, have I fixed nystagmus? I have not fixed nystagmus, right? But almost like 2002 is when I went to the US. But even after 20 years back, 20 years from then on, I still think about nystagmus. I am trying to do my bit of trying to understand aspects in that, right? Like in eye movement. So you asked a question. You may not have found a complete answer or a treatment or a fix to it, but you have tried your little bit to expand that knowledge, okay, to sort of fill in that gap a little bit. So what is it that is driving you to do research or, to become a scientist? So that fundamental clarity you should have. Don't do it for the wrong reasons. That's one. And then what was the second part, Gopi, that you had in your question?
That's covers up everything. Like, yeah.
That covers up. All right, good. Okay.
I have my last question. Like, how do you really balance your research demands with your personal life and well-being?
All right. So the honest answer is, when we say balance, we always assume that we have one thing in one hand, the other thing in the other hand, and you're walking at the same time. Like, how people walking on the tightrope with a pole, they try to balance. So to me, the word balance is you're sort of like, leaning to the left or the right and you walk on the tightrope. I don't think in real life, nobody can do two things at the same time. You can't. Okay, you can't multitask. You might say there is a word that exists, but you cannot. You do only one thing at a time. So if you're doing your work, then you focus fully on the work. If you take off, you have gone on a holiday, then focus only on that. Okay, so pre-plan your holidays and work your schedule in such a way you can get to do certain things. For me, I don't think, you choose your life and your priorities accordingly as well. Okay, so depending on where you want to put your priority, you choose your lifestyle that way. I wanted to do yoga because I had a breathing problem. This is even before COVID came. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. I took 3 days off my work week and then I went with the class and then I do it every day, right? I still practice. So you need to know when to take off from your work. What are you going to prioritize? You absolutely have to prioritize your health. Otherwise, you can't get anything done, be it in life or work or wherever else. So that's your top priority. Once you make sure that you've taken care of that and your personal time, your me time, your family time, and all of that, you work around and you decide, okay, I need to take off well ahead in time. So that way you don't get mixed up with things. You can't be like having a meltdown and when you have to teach and the students have the final exam, you can't say that, oh, I need a break, I want to go off. That's not possible. So you just have to be smart enough to say, okay, the students get their vacation, semester break, and that's when you're going to plan your holidays as well. So I think if you plan it out pretty well, it shouldn't be too hard to balance.
So thank you so much for sharing your perspective and research knowledge. I hope this conversation has ignited a little spark within all the listeners. See you all in another ORCS Spark podcast. Thank you very much, Dr. Premnandini.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gopinath, and happy Vijayadashami. I'm glad to give this interview on this day.
Thank you so much.